Imagine you are walking down the street, minding your own business, when suddenly a stranger starts dancing in the street. At first, you may not really think much of it, but what if you realize that the person dancing won't stop? As you sort of watch these people, you might think that the person is strange, crazy, or maybe performing some sort of odd project or art experiment. When you go home and go to bed, you possibly won't even consider what you'd seen that day. However, a week later, imagine you return and that person is still there. Maybe you think that they're just back to do the same thing as last week, but as you sort of ask around, everyone tells you the same thing, which is that the person hasn't left. According to everyone, the dancer has been going for a week straight without stopping. So as the days go by, numerous others seem to be drawn to the dancer and soon begin dancing themselves. Now, like that original dancer, the newcomers seemingly won't or possibly can't stop dancing. Maybe you'd think that the dancer had infected other people with the urge to dance. Now, infected to dance? It may sound crazy, but such a thing has occurred before. In fact, it has happened a few times throughout history, with the most famous event known as the Dancing Plague of 1518. Today, we're going to cover the unusual event and what will be the beginning of a new series on this channel, which I've decided to name Cryptic Kocktales. The purpose of the series is to take a more laid back and, if you couldn't tell, partially inebriated look at some odd stories within the realms of history, the paranormal, or really anything I feel like talking about. Now, these videos will be in very stark contrast with my other more in-depth videos, because the entire point of this series is to sort of just have fun and take a more relaxed look at some stories that I personally enjoy or find funny. So without further ado, let's take a look at the so-called Dancing Plague of 1518. Patient zero of this so-called plague is known as Frau Trophia. In July 1518, Trophia stepped onto the street in Strasbourg, France, sorry. At the time, Strasbourg was part of the Holy Roman Empire, but today it is one of the cities located on the French-German border. After stepping into the street, Trophia began to shimmy and shake as if she was dancing. Most people just thought she was weird, but she pretty much refused to stop this routine. After a few days, she eventually collapsed from exhaustion, but once she was well rested, she stood back up and started to dance again. After recharging, so to say, others began to join her in the streets, and by the end of the week, 30 additional people had joined her. And to passerbys, it seemed less like these people wouldn't stop and more like they couldn't stop. What was even more concerning was that this affliction or plague, disease, whatever you want to say, continued to spread well into August of 1518. And by that time, over 400 people had seemed to fall victim to the plague, and like Trophy, most people reportedly danced until they collapsed from exhaustion. It's also rumored that some danced so long and so intensely that they suffered strokes or heart attacks, which eventually led to numerous deaths. In the contemporary reports, physicians, religious leaders, Strasbourg city council members, and others offered theories such as demonic possession and hot blood as the cause of this disease or plague. The physicians believed that the only cure for this ailment was to, quote, dance the fever away. Which I just want to say, I love old-time medicine so much. You could just say anything, and it would be taken as fact. Now, to prevent any further deaths or collapses, the council provided an indoor space to serve as somewhat of what I can only describe as a dance hall. It was basically to give these people shelter so they would stop collapsing and reportedly dying. However, since the people thought that the dancing was eventually going to lead to the cure, they also hired additional professional dancers, and actually hired musicians too, to also keep the so-called infected moving and dancing. Of course, this ended up backfiring because the general public believed that maybe this was some sort of divine judgment enacted by Saint Vitus. Now, Vitus was a Christian Sicilian who is believed to have been martyred sometime around 300 AD. Very little is known about Vitus, but for the context of this story, it's important to know that he is usually known as the patron saint of dancers. So people began to believe that they had been cursed by Vitus for a lack of belief, and this is what I meant when I said that this idea backfired. So now, even people who weren't infected began to dance to sort of show appreciation to Vitus so that they themselves wouldn't be cursed as well. So after this actually led officials to ban both dancing and music in public spaces in early September 1518 as kind of like a last-ditch effort to kind of put this plague to rest. For the most part, it actually worked. Most likely, the reason this worked was because those who continued to dance after the ban were arrested and then dragged up to a nearby mountain that was used for religious purposes to, I guess, pray for forgiveness. Once they were forgiven, their affliction just so happened to go away. And when everyone else heard that this could cure them, they too prayed, and the dancing plague was soon eradicated. Now, as I said earlier, this wasn't the first time this sort of thing happened. Similar events were recorded in Germany 400 or so years prior, and they were actually also reported in Italy about 100 years before this happened. But the dancing plague of 1518 is by far the most popular, but that's also because it's by far the most documented. It's also just a ridiculous topic to try to wrap your head around. So, even in my drunken state right now, the idea of dancing due to unknown reasons to the point of actually dying is just an insane thing to think about. But in actuality, it might not be that crazy. Instead, it may be more likely that over the last 400 years, some misinformation and misconceptions have sort of infected this case. Now, if you're anything like me and you've heard of this case and the story, you've probably always heard that people literally danced themselves to death. And you know what? I even mentioned it in my telling of the story, but I made sure to sort of specify that these deaths were rumors. In actuality, reports of deaths due to the dancing plague didn't surface until years after it had already taken place. Also, it just makes a lot more sense that either no people died or very few people died. So, according to legend, they say around 15 people died a day from the plague. But that math doesn't really add up. If you do the math for just a month, 15 people a day would be nearly 450 people in total. That number of casualties, or fatalities, would undoubtedly have been reported in contemporary sources, but those numbers never appear. Also, there are some disagreements about whether Frau Trophy was the name of the woman who was first infected with the disease. However, this name is probably pretty accurate because it does appear in some contemporary sources. Speaking of her, from what I kind of understood and through my research, I don't really think that Trophy was present for the conclusion of the plague. If you look through most of the sources, it's pretty hard to actually find out what happened to her, but it seems she may have been cured sometime before the climax and conclusion of the plague. As for possible explanations, obviously this was not the work of divine judgment, demonic possession, hot blood, or any other ridiculous yet hilarious old-time explanation. In the present, two theories are often brought up for this incident. The first explanation frequently put forward is ergot poisoning. Now, if you didn't know, ergot is a type of fungus that commonly grows on rye, which of course is a key ingredient in bread. Now, when we as humans consume ergot, they fall victim to ergotism or ergot poisoning. Now, the long-term effects of ergotism can be broken down into two categories, either convulsive or gangrenous. So the convulsive type of ergotism attacks the nervous system and causes painful seizures and spasms. Typically, these are accompanied by headaches, vomiting, diarrhea, and mental effects such as psychosis. So for the gangrenous variety, it's pretty unlikely that if ergotism was the explanation for this, this would unlikely be the variety these people suffer from. So the gangrenous variety causes the typical sort of symptoms associated with gangrene, which is like tissue death, swelling, pain, peeling, and the possibility of the loss of limbs and eventually death. Now, I'd actually say it's almost impossible that ergotism of either variety was what was the cause of the dancing plague of 1518. Instead, I think a good old case of mass hysteria is responsible. Now, again, like I said earlier, if you're anything like me, earlier I said this was a different thing, but if you're anything like me, the term mass hysteria may sort of make your eyes roll because of how often it's kind of used as a sort of catch-all term for anything that's sort of mysterious. But this time, I think it actually lines up. I don't think it'd be crazy for me to say that the Middle Ages probably sucked. And while technically 1518 is just outside the time frame of the Middle Ages, it probably still sucked, especially in the region where this happened. So at the time, Strasbourg was already riddled with famine and disease, and was a particularly devout region of the Holy Roman Empire. So most of these people were already living a horrible, stressful life, and were highly superstitious about divine judgment. All it took was one woman stepping into the street and beginning to dance to convince the common folk that they were being cursed by Saint Vitus. But still, if mass hysteria was the most likely explanation for what happened here, what started it? As we know, the first victim of the plague was a woman named Frau Trophy, but what caused her to dance? Now, it is possible that she could have just been a crazy woman, or maybe she was just mentally ill, but there is also a chance that she was suffering from a neurological condition known as chorea. Chorea, which is derived from a Greek word that literally means dance, is a neurological condition that causes sort of these involuntary movements throughout the body. Sometimes when these movements affect the legs and arms, it almost looks like the individual or victim is dancing. Funnily enough, there is a type of chorea that is commonly referred to as Saint Vitus's dance. And in the present day, some believe an individual with some kind of chorea may have led to the mass hysteria in multiple cases of so-called dancing mania. Now, if you do think about it, it does make some amount of sense. In the present day, we are still learning how some disabilities work, but even just 100 years ago, those with disabilities were often looked down upon. Now, imagine what those people would have been viewed as 400 plus years ago, in a time that was just full of wacky medicine and ridiculous ideas. demonic possession or divine judgment would have probably seemed logical. So it could be that a woman suffering from a condition that would have been impossible to understand at the time was thought to have been cursed by a saint to dance. Throw that in with the fact that famine and disease were rampant in your towns, which in and of themselves caused insane levels of stress, you might end up believing you'd been cursed too and begin to dance just as that first woman did. Then, after that, it's only made worse when officials tell you that the only way to bring the dancing to an end is to continue dancing until you're healed. Everyone just bust a move until you're feeling good again. If after that you still continue to dance, you were then forced to pray the ailment away, which would oh so miraculously cure you after all this. In my opinion, mass hysteria does kind of wrap all of this up into a nice little bow. And for me, and with that, that kind of brings our story to an end, and the first episode of this new series to a close. I know this is probably a really short video, but that's also kind of what I wanted out of this. I hope you all enjoy it. This is a series that I've been kind of tossing around for a while. I know it's pretty different compared to my usual videos, but that is exactly what I wanted from this series. As I said back in the intro, I wanted this to be a whole different thing from the... I want this to be a whole different type of series from my usual videos. Because in my usual videos, I'm one that kind of like looks into every minute detail of the topics that I covered. But stuff like this, I don't feel like needs as much information, and I kind of just want to speed through. That was like a thing of just being like, I don't care about this topic. I do like this topic, and it's something that I've thought about for a long time, but there isn't much information about it, and it also isn't like the craziest topic in the world to kind of figure out or solve or put my own kind of conclusion on. So mostly this series going forward is going to be reserved for stuff that I am pretty positive is not going to need as much research as a lot of the other things that I cover. Either way, I do hope you enjoy it. If you did enjoy it, let me know. You can let me know by subscribing to the channel or liking the video. You can even do both. Also, as with all my videos, I do like to hear what you all say. So if you have a different opinion about what could have happened here, you can let me know down in the comments. I do try to respond to all the comments. Sometimes I don't get to all of them, but I do read them no matter what. So if you have a different opinion about this topic or even this new series, you can let me know down there and I'll try to respond to you. I can't promise that I will, but I will try my best to. But with that, I think I'm going to go to bed now. So, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon.